In a crowded courtroom humming with small-town gossip, a uniformed cop snapped a kick beneath the defense table like he owned the building, his boot thudding into a quiet black defendant who hadn't said a word. But Malik Grant wasn't just any man. At 38, he carried the calm weight of a decorated Navy SEAL whose record could turn 1,000 assumptions to dust. He sat steady, shoulders squared, eyes down, absorbing the strike without a flinch. And when a single phone rang at the clerk's desk later that morning, the swagger in that officer's gaze would melt into pure panic. What truth could flip a courtroom and convert bravado into handcuffs? Let me tell you what unfolded, because once you hear it, the way you measure justice won't feel the same. I first saw Malik, compact, coiled strength, built to carry more than most ever lift. He sat in that defendant's chair like a man who'd been told 1,000 times to keep his head down and let the system talk over him. Plain clothes, clean but worn, hands folded on the table, eyes tracing the wood grain as if it could steady the room. The charge on paper sounded almost comic, disturbing the peace at a corner store. But the whispers carried a different verdict: dangerous, unpredictable, one more troublemaker who refuses simple rules. In a town like this, once rumors take root, the truth doesn't get sunlight. Then the heavy courtroom doors boomed open. Sergeant Blake Kincaid strode in like a man stepping onto a stage he'd performed on for years. Uniform razor-pressed, jaw set. That swagger of someone who doesn't expect a challenge. He locked on Malik with contempt, the kind you could read from the back row, certain the room agreed with him. Kincaid cut a path straight to the defense table and dipped close enough for the first row to catch it. "Didn't think you'd show," he murmured, breath warm with mockery. Malik didn't blink. He kept that composed stillness, the kind you see in people who've learned patience the hard way. Up on the bench, Judge Elaine Archer adjusted her readers and surveyed the room with carved stone calm. Late 50s, stern lines, the kind of gaze that can carry a verdict before testimony begins. Her eyes paused on Malik longer than they needed to, as if the case file had already told her enough. Talia Mendoza, his overworked public defender, leaned toward him, whispering, "Let me do the talking." Her tone stayed steady, but worry tugged at the corners of her eyes. She could feel gravity tilting the deck. Malik's mouth curved, just barely. "You think they're interested in the truth?" From the press bench, a rookie reporter named Liam Carter watched, then he wrote, his pen hovering above the page. Something about Malik nagged at him, the measured economy of every movement, the way his hand drifted, almost unconsciously, to a pale line on his wrist before settling again. It wasn't nervousness, it was control. Liam printed a single word at the top of his notebook. Why? None of them, not the judge, not the prosecutor, not even Malik's own attorney, had the context to see the man in front of them clearly. They were moments away from having their assumptions detonate. Kincaid cleared his throat like the world existed to be briefed by him and leaned into the microphone. "When I approached the defendant," he began, letting disdain coat the word, "he was agitated, belligerent, the kind who thinks rules don't apply." He paused, letting the picture settle before twisting the knife. "People like that," he added, the phrase floating like poison. Everyone knew what he meant, and it had nothing to do with Malik's actual conduct. Malik stayed still, hands clenched so tight his knuckles blanched, eyes fixed on the table as if refusing to give Kincaid the reaction he wanted. Talia shot to her feet. "Objection, Your Honor. There's no evidence my client was violent or threatening." "That's pure speculation." Judge Archer barely glanced up from her notes. "Overruled." Talia's jaw worked, but she sat slow and controlled, whispering, "We're not letting that stand." Kincaid carried on, polishing every detail until it gleamed with self-serving light, turning a simple interaction into a cautionary tale. He conveniently omitted that Malik had been waiting in line for coffee and had helped an elderly woman with her groceries minutes earlier. Facts fell away, narrative took the wheel, and the room leaned with it, Finally, Talia rose. "Objection, Your Honor." "There's nothing to support this. He's speculating about violence that never happened." Judge Archer didn't pause. "Overruled." The word landed like a lid. Talia sat, unclenching her jaw only enough to whisper, "We'll address it." Kincaid's mouth curled, savoring the momentum. He resumed his version, smoothing edges, polishing his own restraint until it shone. He talked about an erratic man near a counter, a scene about to go bad, and his calm intervention. What he didn't describe was Malik standing in line to buy coffee, or the way Malik had lifted 2 grocery bags into the trunk of a woman old enough to be his grandmother. Memory is pliable. Narrative is power. The room drifted with the tale that was easiest to swallow. A current Talia was fighting stroke by stroke, lungs burning, jaw set. When Kincaid stepped away from the witness chair, he didn't take the straight path back. He looped around the defense table, close enough for the first rows to catch the private theater. "Look at me when I'm talking to you," he muttered, a stage whisper dressed as authority. Malik breathed in, held, breathed out, 4 beats in, 4 beats out, the box-breathing cadence that had steadied him in dark water and narrow alleys. Not here, not now, he told himself. Talia's hand hovered near his sleeve. "Don't give him anything," she murmured. But Kincaid couldn't leave it alone. He needed a reaction to validate the story he had already told. The gallery leaned forward, feeling the static build, the way people feel lightning before it hits, the way air thins before a storm tears open the sky, hard and sudden, inevitable, close. When Kincaid finally stepped down, he didn't head straight to his seat. He took the scenic route, right past the defense table, tilting toward Malik just enough for the nearest rows to catch it. "Look at me when I'm talking to you," he muttered. Malik inhaled slow, held, exhaled in a 4-count rhythm he'd learned in places where composure meant survival. Not here, not now. Talia leaned in, urgent but calm. Ignore him. Kincaid didn't. He circled like a man searching for a bruise to poke. The gallery buzzed, sensing something ugly growing beneath the courthouse polish. Judge Archer's pen scratched. Liam's camera clicked twice, instinct leading his finger before his mind caught up. Through his lens he caught the contrast, Kincaid's sneer against Malik's careful stillness, 2 worlds colliding in a few inches of space. Everyone felt the air tighten, that pre-storm pressure that makes people hold their breath. Kincaid's boot shot out from under the drape of the table with a predator's quickness. It cracked against Malik's shin, muted, mean. A woman in the gallery swallowed a gasp that turned into a hiss, and 2 heads whipped toward the bailiff. "Order!" Deputy Torres snapped, already moving. Malik's face didn't change, only his hands tightened, bones showing at the knuckles. He let the pain pass through him like a wave and fade. Talia rose so fast her chair stuttered against the floor. "Your Honor, Officer Kincaid just kicked my client." The hush that followed felt like the whole room waiting to see if reality would be acknowledged or paved over. Kincaid didn't even bother to look guilty. He wore a small, satisfied smile, the expression of a man sure the rules were furniture, to be arranged or ignored at will depending on the company. Judge Archer's reply came frost-cold. "Counselor, sit down or I will clear this courtroom." Talia stood her ground. "With respect, let the record reflect that Officer Kincaid assaulted Mr. Grant." Archer placed her pen down with geometric precision. "The record reflects what this court says it reflects. Now move on." A few people blinked like they'd been slapped. Power doesn't need to shout when it's sure of itself. It just decides. Liam scribbled a line he'd later cross out, then lifted his camera again, drawn to the collision of a smug smirk and a controlled, unbothered stillness. Malik's fingers ghosted back to that old wrist scar, pressing, then easing, the ritual that anchored him to the moment and kept the room from pulling him into its story. He breathed, steady and precise, the way he had been trained to breathe when the stakes were measured in lives. From the press row, Liam's shutter snapped twice, instinct carving the moment into evidence. Kincaid's smug tilt on one frame, Malik's unshaken calm on the next. Only it wasn't calm, not entirely. Malik's fingers found that pale seam on his wrist, pressing there until the world narrowed and steadied. A habit from another life, where staying composed didn't win you points. It kept people breathing. Not here, not today, he reminded himself. When he finally lifted his gaze to Kincaid's, something in the officer's grin faltered. It was the look of a man recognizing restraint for what it really is. Not weakness, but a choice made by someone capable of much worse. Kincaid had crossed a line without understanding whose line it was, and somewhere the consequences were already moving toward him, inevitable as weather rolling over open water. The room didn't know it yet, but the ground had started to tilt. The tension had settled into something thick and suffocating when a phone trilled on the clerk's desk, slicing through the hush like a blade. Heads turned. In a room where every sound carried meaning, the electronic chirp felt almost rude. The clerk, a woman in her 50s with wire rims, answered, "Superior Court Clerk's Office." She listened for 3 seconds, then looked straight at Malik. Her posture stiffened. Color drained from her face as if someone had pulled a plug. "Yes," she said, voice suddenly careful. "One moment, please." Covering the receiver, she addressed the bench. "Your Honor, there's an urgent call. They say they're from the Department of Defense, asking for you by name." That shifted the air in the room. Judge Archer frowned. "The Department of Defense? This is a court proceeding. They insist it's urgent," the clerk cut in, "and they mentioned the defendant by name." Archer reached for the receiver, every movement deliberate, as if to remind the room she wasn't rattled by theatrics. "This is Judge Archer," she said, her voice crisp and courtroom cold. Silence draped the benches. Even the fluorescents seemed to hum more quietly. At first her expression barely moved. Then a flicker, a small betraying shift, as the caller kept talking. Her grip on the phone changed. "You're certain?" she asked, now softer. Her eyes cut briefly to Malik, sharp and appraising, and for the first time uncertainty touched her features. "Yes," she said into the line. "Yes, I understand." "No, he hasn't. I see. We'll accommodate that request." When she replaced the handset, the room held its breath, waiting for a translation that didn't come. For a heartbeat, power had left the bench, and moved somewhere no one could see. It made people sit straighter. Kincaid let out a low chuckle, like he was indulging a prank. "What's next? An alien invasion?" His smirk faded when Archer stood, authority slamming back into place. "Court will recess." Now the bailiff blinked. "Your Honor, we still have—" "Now," she repeated, the word dropping like a gavel by itself. Benches scraped as people rose, whispers sparking along the aisles. What was that about? Did she say defense? Why him? At the end of the gallery, Deputy Clerk Aaron Cole slipped toward a side door. Out in the hallway, he thumbed a message with quick, practiced motions, pausing only once before hitting send. The text was simple. "They're on their way." Back inside, the judge's face was unreadable marble. Malik remained still, but something in his posture changed, like a man who had been waiting for confirmation he hadn't dared to expect. Beneath the careful stillness, anticipation uncoiled, a soldier's readiness tucked under civilian clothes. Beyond the courthouse walls, a low rumble threaded the air, faint enough to dismiss. People kept talking, half rising, half craning, the noise of recess swallowing the clue. Then came the unmistakable growl of heavy engines settling near the steps. Car doors popped in a staccato line, followed by the synchronized thud of boots on pavement. Not the lazy shuffle of visitors. Purposeful, trained. Heads pivoted toward the tall windows. Even Archer leaned a fraction, as if the blinds might give up a secret. The front doors swung wide a beat later. 4 men strode in wearing uniforms that commanded attention. Not local blues, but deep navy, with gold insignia at the shoulders. They moved with measured precision, eyes sweeping the room in disciplined arcs. These were not spectators. They were here to do a job. Kincaid moved first, stepping into their path with his palm raised like jurisdiction could be willed into existence. "You can't just walk in," he started. The man at the front didn't slow. He broke the plane of Kincaid's upraised hand without touching it, eyes fixed beyond the officer as if he were background noise. Only then did the crowd see the figure behind them, the presence that made the uniforms make sense. Admiral Nathan Rourke. Even without the dress whites and the stacked ribbons, you would have known him. He carried the gravity of a man who'd spent decades giving orders in impossible situations. In full regalia, the effect was surgical. His voice cut through the shock with clean precision. "Where is Malik Grant?" A hush hit the room, a sucked-in breath that didn't let go. Why would a four-star be looking for a defendant booked for disturbing the peace? Malik didn't move at first. He let the question hang, let the weight of it settle across the gallery. Then he stood smooth and unhurried. His eyes met Rourke's, and for a heartbeat the courtroom fell away. No judge, no jury, no hostile crowd. Just recognition between two men who understood exactly who the other was. Rourke's expression changed in a way you don't often see at that rank. Respect, real and unvarnished. Not ceremony. History. Malik gave a crisp nod. Rourke returned it. No salute, no handshake. They didn't need the choreography. The acknowledgement said more than any introduction could. The people in the back might not have had the words for it, but they could feel the floor tilt under their feet, the balance of power rolling like a tide. Whatever story had been told about Malik Grant a few minutes earlier had just met something bigger. Judge Archer cleared her throat, the sound tighter than before. "Admiral Rourke, this is highly irregular. I'm going to have to ask." Rourke didn't look away from Malik. "I know exactly where I am, Judge," he said, even and unhurried. "I'm not here to play politics or stage a scene." The back rows rustled with a tide of whispers. What is going on? He's not just some random guy. Two city officials traded glances that said they'd misread the entire thing. Deputy Torres shifted his stance as if the room were rearranging which authority mattered. Talia exhaled for the first time in minutes, barely perceptible. Liam's pen scribbled, then stopped, then scribbled again, trying to keep up with the meaning of what he was seeing. Procedure felt slippery in Archer's hands, and she knew it. Her jaw tightened as she weighed her next move. Kincaid rallied, stepping forward as if proximity could restore his footing. He squared his shoulders, voice pitched for command. "Sir, with all due respect." Rourke turned his head a fraction, giving him a sliver of attention. The Admiral's eyes were steady, almost bored, the look of someone who had already assessed and filed you away. The rest of the sentence broke apart in Kincaid's mouth and went nowhere. He shut his lips and swallowed, the sound loud in the expectant quiet. A murmured ripple moved along the benches and then faded, like people remembered they were somewhere silence has teeth. Talia didn't smile, but a thread of tension unwound from her shoulders. Liam caught the moment, one frame of humbled swagger, one of a man who didn't need to raise his voice to be obeyed. Even the lights seemed to hum softly, as if the building understood the hierarchy, had redrawn itself. It wasn't a glare, it was something colder, the practiced, unimpressed appraisal of a commander who knows exactly where everyone stands and how little you matter to the mission. Kincaid looked away first. The gallery didn't move, hardly breathed. The room felt stitched together by the fluorescent hum and a shared realization that the story they'd been swallowing was collapsing in real time. A few people glanced at Malik as if seeing him for the first time, not as a roomer in a uniform, but as a man who had carried things the rest of them wouldn't recognize up close. Whatever happened next wouldn't be written by swagger or gossip. It would be written by the people who had just walked through those doors, and by the defendant who had chosen restraint when he could have done otherwise, and whose name the Admiral had spoken like it mattered. The Admiral didn't break eye contact with Malik, but his words were meant for the bench. "Judge Archer, I request an immediate sidebar in chambers. I carry written orders and a sealed memorandum from the Department of the Navy regarding the defendant's status. The gallery rustled, then quieted. Archer's chin lifted, pride wrestling with prudence. "This court is in session," she said, each syllable balanced. "You may speak here, on the record." Rourke considered, then nodded. "Understood." He passed a thick, blue-taped envelope to an aide, who carried it to the clerk. Talia watched every handoff, like it was chain of custody for oxygen. Malik didn't move. He stood inside stillness, the way some men stand inside armor, the calm not an act, but an old discipline. The room seemed to expand around that calm, rows of faces tilting to it, like a sail slowly unfurling, as if a locked door somewhere had just swung open. Archer signaled the clerk. "Miss Shu, note the Admiral's representation. Identify any companion filings." The clerk, already pale, nodded and began riffling the inbox tray. Rourke's aides drifted to the side aisles, not threatening, just present, precision arranged in boots and breath. Deputy Torres angled closer to the rail, hands open, stance neutral. "Counsel," Archer said to Talia, "does your client consent to the Admiral addressing his status?" Talia glanced at Malik. He gave a fractional nod. "We consent, Your Honor," she said, "with the understanding that any classified specifics be handled under seal." Archer's gaze flicked to Rourke. "That is acceptable," he said. "You'll have what you need, Judge. No more, no less." The promise wasn't a boast. It sounded like logistics. Liam's pen hovered, then dropped a note. Not theater. Operations. Something irreversible had become visible in the room, and Liam felt his story widen into a new shape. "Mr. Grant," Rourke continued, "was executing duties pursuant to orders issued under Title 10 authority and coordinated under a cross-agency directive. He remains subject to recall and protective measures. The events precipitating his arrest intersect with an ongoing federal matter. I have documentation for the court's review and a request to transfer temporary custody to a Navy liaison until a secure briefing can occur." The phrases landed like weight plates set evenly on a table. Archer didn't blink. "Defense?" "We'll respond after reviewing the materials," Talia said, steady. She touched Malik's sleeve, not to restrain, but to anchor. Kincaid's eyes narrowed, tracking the packet like prey that had refused to act like prey. Liam wrote, "Protective status? Why?" He didn't write the other question crowding his throat. What kind of arrest collides with federal work? But the air carried it anyway, humming through rows that were realizing the picture they'd painted needed entirely different colors. Archer held the envelope without opening it, weighing authority against prudence. "Admiral," she said, "this court recognizes neither intimidation nor theater. If you've come to bulldoze procedure, you'll be disappointed." Rourke's tone didn't change. "I've come to keep people alive, Judge. Procedure serves that end today by moving quickly." He gestured to the second officer at his shoulder. "Commander Patel, JAG Corps." The commander stepped forward with a slimmer packet. "This is a proposed protective order and a suggested framework for handling any references that implicate classified operation," Patel said, voice clean as glass. Archer took both packets, eyes thoughtful rather than impressed. "Noted!" She set them down without looking away. The feeling in the room shifted, not a storm breaking, but a tide deciding which line of sand to cross. The courtroom waited, breath held long enough to hurt. Liam felt the story buck under him, like a horse realizing the rider was green. He thumbed his editor, keep space open, big turn, and lifted his lens. Kincaid's posture had altered, swagger melting into calculation. The sergeant sliced a look toward the side exit where Aaron Cole had vanished. Rourke clocked it and flicked 2 fingers. An aide peeled toward the foyer, just in case the leak widened. Archer slid a letter opener under the blue tape, then paused, making the room sit in its own heartbeat. "Before I read," she said, "Mr. Colonel Grant's counsel will be heard Talia Rose again. We ask the court to preserve all materials in the sergeant's possession, including body camera footage and phone records." Archer nodded. "So ordered." Kincaid's jaw worked. Liam zoomed, centering that twitch in the frame and beyond it, Malik's steadiness, Malik's restraint like iron cooled to a dark glow. The judge read. Line after line pressed her mouth thinner. She reached the page's end, flipped, scanned, returned to the first paragraph, as if checking math written on a moving train. Finally, she set the documents down with the care of someone lowering a hot pan onto a narrow trivet. This court acknowledges receipt of classified correspondence from the Department of the Navy and accepts it under seal, she said. Her gaze moved to Talia. Miss Mendoza? Only this, Talia replied. Mr. Grant has complied with every lawful instruction since contact. He did not initiate conflict. He did not respond in kind when assaulted Archer's eyes lifted to Malik. The look wasn't soft and it wasn't hostile. It was appraisal. She pivoted back to Kincaid, and the temperature changed. Liam felt it too. The moment a judge's attention turns into consequence. It was not friendly. Evaluating the distance between a story and a fact. Kincaid couldn't hold it. This is a sham, he snapped, stepping forward before he remembered the order. He made a scene in a store, and now we're pretending he's some kind of... Sergeant, Archer cut in, you are out of line. Torres moved without drama, simply placing himself between Kincaid and the well. Rourke's attention tilted toward the door. 2 more sailors had quietly posted at the rear, watchful, relaxed. Talia kept her tone even. Sergeant, did you disable your body camera before initiating contact? No, he said. County IT disagrees, Talia replied. We subpoenaed the audit logs this morning. She held up a sheet with times and toggles. Kincaid swallowed. It malfunctioned. At the precise minute Mr. Grant entered the frame, Talia asked, Coincidence? The benches creaked with quiet disbelief. In the corner, Liam wrote, Narrative is breaking. He underlined it once. The room's rumor engine had met time-stamped circuitry, and circuitry rarely blinked first. The clerk's monitor chimed, new message, the small bubble breaking the hush. Miss Shue glanced at Archer. At her nod, she opened it. Your Honor, it's from County IT, she said, voice steady but thin. They confirm manual deactivation of the sergeant's camera at the time defense identified. Audit trail shows an override from his unit. The murmur that followed felt different, less gossip, more gravity. Archer didn't look at Kincaid. Sergeant, she said, you will surrender your service weapon and your badge to Deputy Torres before leaving this courtroom. Your conduct here will be addressed separately. Kincaid's cheeks modeled a dangerous red. Your Honor, that is the order of this court, Archer said. Another word and we'll add contempt to your afternoon. She turned back to the clerk. Mark the email as Court's Exhibit A, under seal. You will also turn over your personal phone forthwith for preservation and review. Outside, engines settled into a patient growl. Through the slatted blinds, shapes idled, dark sedans, a matte van with government plates, an SUV that didn't belong to any county department. People craned and whispered, curiosity tugging against the courtroom's enforced calm. Rourke didn't turn. He didn't need to. His world moved on reliable clocks. Archer tapped the sealed packet with a fingernail, then addressed the room. We will proceed. Miss Mendoza, narrow your questions to the facts relevant to the charge. We will not detour into speculation. Talia nodded. Malik's hands loosened by millimeters, and Liam noticed, marking the detail even as he wondered why he noticed. The fluorescent hum took on an odd clarity, the sound of a building listening to itself. Someone coughed, and the sound jumped. On the far aisle, a uniform shifted stance, boots whispering against tile. Proceed carefully. Talia stepped to the well, voice even. Sergeant, did Mr. Grant help an elderly woman with her groceries moments before your interaction? Kincaid's jaw flexed. I didn't see that, but the store's surveillance did. She held up printed stills, faces blurred, time code clear. These are marked as defense exhibits. Archer nodded to the clerk, who stamped and passed them up. Do you dispute that this is you? Talia asked, pointing at Kincaid in frame, looming near the counter. I was performing my duties, he said, including kicking a seated defendant under a table. Objection, the prosecutor blurted late. Sustained as to form, Archer said. Rephrase. You made physical contact with Mr. Grant in this courtroom, correct? Talia asked. Kincaid stared at the table. Yes. And you used the phrase people like that to describe him earlier? He didn't answer. Yes or no? Yes. Answer clearly, under oath. Your Honor, Commander Patel said, the department also requests a temporary non-disclosure order regarding any classified references made in open court. We'll provide a sanitized summary for the record. She offered another page. Archer signed with quick, decisive strokes. The pen's scratch sounded loud in the hush. Granted. Rourke finally turned to the bench. Judge, I'll say only what I must. Mr. Grant received a citation for actions that prevented a mass casualty event overseas within the last year. The specifics are not for this room. Archer absorbed it, her face not changing, but the room felt colder around the edges. Noted, she said. This case remains a municipal matter, unless and until otherwise required. Rourke inclined his head once. His actions were not hypothetical. They saved families, firefighters, teachers, strangers that night. Archer leaned back. The chair creaked softly. Here is what we'll do, she said. We will address the municipal charge on the narrow facts. We will not impede any federal protective measure. Sergeant Kincaid will answer defense counsel's remaining questions. Afterward, he will remain for a separate inquiry. The last two words held shape like ice. Miss Mendoza. Talia approached the stand again. Sergeant, earlier you told this court, people like that often turn violent. Define people like that without referencing race, income, or clothing. Kincaid's mouth opened, then closed. It's an instinct, he said. Training. Training or bias, Talia said, almost kind. He stared at the far wall. Instinct. And your instinct told you to kick a seated man rather than document a nonviolent interaction? The quiet carried weight. Please answer directly. Your instinct contradicts your training, Talia said. The use of force continuum does not include concealed kicks at seated civilians. She let the sentence sit, then continued. You tried to provoke him, and when he refused, you escalated, correct? No, Kincaid replied, but the denial sounded like a reflex, not a reason. Talia laid one more still on the rail. Here you are, after the contact, smiling at the defendant while he remained seated. Why? He stared at the grainy frame. No answer, Talia asked. Archer's gaze shifted, and the room felt it like shade moving. This court will recess briefly before ruling on the defense motion, Archer said. Deputy, collect the sergeant's weapon and badge now. Torres moved. The holster clicked. The badge came free with a whisper. Liam scribbled, Power is procedural until it isn't. The items would be taken from the sergeant and locked away. Answer the question. Archer straightened the stack in front of her and spoke to the record. The court finds that Sergeant Kincaid's conduct in this courtroom raises serious concerns regarding credibility and restraint. The assault allegation will be referred to Internal Affairs and to the district attorney for review. She turned to Torres. Deputy, note the referral. Yes, Your Honor. The benches murmured, then deflated into quiet. Talia leaned toward Malik. We're almost through. I know, he said. He watched Rourke, not watching him, the way old teammates used to watch a door, trust wrapped in habit. The fluorescence hummed. Outside, an engine idled. Inside, the old story people had brought with them, about who deserves belief and who deserves control, was still in the air, but thinner now, fraying at the edges, as if the day had taken a knife to it and left it hanging where it was still insulated. He flexed his hands once beneath the table. Archer drummed a nail once, decisive. Admiral, your liaison will coordinate with my clerk to arrange a secure briefing off the record. Until then, Mr. Grant remains under this court's protection. No contact without defense counsel present, except as necessary for safety. Rourke inclined his head. Understood. He looked at Malik finally, not past him. You did fine, he said, almost conversational. The words were nothing and everything. Kincaid shifted, as if bracing for a blow that might never arrive. He scanned the gallery and found no allies there, only faces adjusting to a new geometry of facts. Liam lowered his pen, listening to the room breathe. We're in recess for 10 minutes, Archer said. The gavel didn't slam, it landed. People stood, their bodies unsure of how to leave the old narrative, like a crowd that has lost the exit sign and decided the ending. The message landed like ballast in rough water. People rose in waves, curiosity braiding with the scrape of benches. Rourke conferred with Commander Patel in a hush that still felt like orders. Torres stood with Kincaid at the rail, the distance between them measured and exact. Liam slid his notebook away and stared at the door Aaron Cole had used earlier. He filed the name as a possibility, a thread to tug when the day stopped spinning. Talia leaned close to Malik. You okay? I've been in tighter rooms, he said. The flicker of humor surprised them both. Don't let anyone turn your silence into permission, she added. You already know that. Malik nodded once. The courthouse smelled like paper and dust and old polish, like institutions do. Outside, a heavy vehicle door thumped shut. Inside, the air eased a degree, as if the building were a chest that had learned it could breathe again. They both almost smiled. When the room settled again, Archer didn't reach for the gavel. We're back on the record, she said. The court reminds all present that contempt is not theoretical. Sergeant Kincaid, you will surrender your badge pending review. A gasp rippled. Even Torres blinked. Kincaid's jaw jutted, then receded. He unclipped the shield like it had weight. Place your hands on the rail, Archer said. Deputy, secure him for transport to internal affairs. The clink of cuffs wasn't loud, but silence carried it to every seat. Liam didn't take the picture. He just watched and wrote. The story changed shape, then changed weight. Malik sat straighter, not proud, not vindicated, exactly aligned, like a man who has tried on every version of himself the world's offered and found the one that fits. Do not resist. Archer's voice softened by half a degree. Mr. One Grant, you will accompany Commander Patel and Ms. Mendoza to a secure conference room. No questions until counsel is present, and no photographs. Liam lowered his camera before she finished, surprised by his own agreement. Rourke stepped aside to clear Malik's path. A small bow of respect passed between them, visible only if you knew where to look. The gallery parted like a tide, with second thoughts. Talia gathered her files, lips pressed to keep the adrenaline on its leash. Torres clicked the door, and the corridor beyond looked longer than it had an hour earlier. Malik rose the way he had sat, measured, unhurried. He didn't look at Kincaid. He didn't need to. Some ceilings lower by themselves. Malik exhaled, then nodded, and followed the corridor where the paint changed shade. At the threshold, Kincaid couldn't help himself. Sir, with all due respect, he began, as if respect were something you could glue to a sentence and make it true. Rourke turned just enough to look at him. It was not anger. It was colder and more final, the practiced, unimpressed assessment of a commander who has already surveyed the terrain and found you irrelevant to the mission. The words withered in Kincaid's mouth and fell between his boots with the dust of every other bluff he'd ever floated in rooms that didn't push back. The sailors didn't move. Torres didn't move. Malik didn't move. The only thing that moved was the story itself, shedding the skin it had worn all morning. In the space left behind, consequences waited with patience that looked like mercy. The corridor swallowed footsteps, and the tale they'd all been telling about power lay on the floor like a shed skin. Without waiting for clearance, Admiral Nathan Rourke stepped forward and set a flat leather folio on Judge Elaine Archer's bench. The sound was soft, but it landed like a gavel by itself. Your Honor, he said, steady, paired to command, this must be entered into the record immediately. Archer regarded the folio with a measured suspicion, not rattled, but alert. Around her, The courtroom's tension tightened another notch, as if the air itself leaned closer. Rourke didn't fill the silence. He let the folio do the talking. Beside the clerk's desk, Miss Heshu froze with a pen half lifted, waiting for instruction. Talia Mendoza angled her body toward Malik Grant, her hand hovering near his sleeve, an anchor without contact. Malik didn't move. He stood inside the calm he'd carried all day, the kind that reads as patience until you've seen where it's forged. The gallery's murmurs fell away to a hum. Archer's tone sharpened by a degree. "What, precisely, am I admitting?" Rourke inclined his head. "Declassified documentation authorized hours ago by the Department of Defense for the court's review under seal." Archer's gaze flicked reflexively to Sergeant Blake Kincaid, still cuffed at the rail, eyes hard, mouth set. For a backup that no longer existed, curiosity or prudence or both pulled her forward. She broke the folio's tape and opened the folder. At first her face stayed carved in marble. Then line by line, something shifted. Brows drawing, mouth narrowing, calculation replacing assumption. She turned a page, then another, a third. When her hand barely trembled, it told the room what the bench would not say yet. Across the aisle, Liam Carter's pen stilled. He didn't write. He watched authority absorb information, like fire taking clean paper. Miss Shue swallowed, waiting for words that didn't arrive on schedule. Rourke turned from the bench to the gallery, his voice finding every corner without strain. "You've been told this man is a defendant," he said. "Malik Grant, charged with disturbing the peace." He let the ordinary weight of that phrase settle long enough for the old narrative to feel familiar and small. But that is not the truth, at least not the whole truth. The room leaned as one organism. Kincaid folded his shoulders into a posture that tried for board and landed on brittle. Malik remained still, the kind of still that suggests a choice, not an absence. Talia's knuckles whitened against her legal pad, not in fear, but in recognition that the floor was about to tilt. Liam lifted his camera half an inch, then lowered it again, as though a lens might shrink what was about to be said. The hum of fluorescence seemed to quiet in anticipation. "Mr. Grant," Rourke continued, "is a decorated Navy SEAL, the operator who led one of the most dangerous hostage recovery missions in recent memory." The words weren't showpieces. They carried the cool density of briefing language. A coordinated operation spanning 3 countries, deep in hostile ground. In the back row, someone gasped, a sound that bounced off paneled walls and disappeared into the hush. Talia's fingers tightened on the bench until the joints paled. Liam's camera trembled once between his hands before he steadied it against his cheekbone. "He led," Rourke said, "and he brought people home." Archer didn't move. Her eyes did, sliding from the classified pages to Malik and back again, as though reconciling 2 realities in real time. This wasn't a story asking for sympathy. It was a record asking to be acknowledged. A rumor was dying, and the truth was taking its place. "He went in with 6, Rourke said, each syllable placed like coordinates. "He came out with every hostage alive. 23 people, not one left behind, no flourish, no drum roll, just a tally of life." The murmur that followed was different, less verdict, more awe. Liam lowered the camera and, for once, just listened. Someone near the aisle whispered, "All of them?" as if the math might change on the second pass. Archer's jaw worked once and stilled. Talia exhaled a breath she hadn't meant to hold. Even Deputy Torres straightened, a shadow of respect passing over his face before he wiped it clean. Malik's gaze stayed forward, unhooked from the swell of attention. He didn't need the room's belief to validate what the record already carried. But in that moment, the courthouse recalibrated its compass. The image of a disturbance had met a ledger of lives returned. "Most of you haven't heard of any of this," Rourke said, "because the records were sealed, scrubbed to protect the operators involved, and the civilians who lived because they did their jobs." His tone never shifted into sermon. It remained operational. Those who planned the mission and those who hate what it accomplished still exist. Protection isn't ceremonial. It's survival. Archer's eyes flicked between the file and Malik, like she was testing the structural integrity of a bridge she'd just been told to cross. Kincaid's face had lost color. He couldn't regain. Liam scribbled one word, protected, then underlined it. Talia kept still, letting the weight land where it needed. The gallery's posture changed almost invisibly. Shoulders softened, chins tipped upward. The room was not absolving, it was adjusting. An adjustment can feel like grace when it's actually judgment, finally redirected at the right target. Mr. Rye, Grant isn't merely a veteran, Rourke said, voice sharpening by a notch. He is still serving this country in ways we will not detail here. He is, at this moment, a protected witness in a federal investigation directly tied to national security. The words hit like an invisible wall. You couldn't see it, but everyone felt where the edges ran. Archer didn't blink. The court hears you, she said, neutral as stone, but something in the cadence admitted a new fact into its bloodstream. Talia angled a look at Malik that said everything and asked nothing. Liam marked the sentence and boxed it with 2 lines, an instinctive headline framing itself. Kincaid swallowed, the sound oddly loud, as if the room's acoustics had turned against him. Miss Shue hovered a fingertip above her keyboard, ready to transcribe a gravity that was no longer theoretical. So, understand this, Rourke went on, not raising his voice. His safety isn't a courtesy extended to a polite guest. It's federal law. Any harm, any intimidation, any assault against him triggers penalties you will not enjoy discovering. A fragile silence settled, the kind that clarifies rather than threatens. Kincaid's eyes flicked to the door and back, calculating exits that didn't exist anymore. The kick under the table, earlier a petty cruelty dressed as authority, suddenly lived in a different column of the ledger. Liam noted the shift with 2 tight words. Federal exposure. Talia's shoulders loosened by a fraction, not victory, just relief that the language had finally caught up to the truth. Archer tapped the folio once, a small metronome to thought. The room held still, and when systems speak in exact terms, rumor runs out of places to sit down. Archer found her voice. Admiral, are you telling this court? I'm telling you, Rourke cut in, the blade hidden in the evenness. The Department of Defense is fully apprised of how Mr. Grant has been treated within these walls, and I will see that all conduct related to him today is referred to the United States Attorney's Office for review. He didn't look at Kincaid. He didn't need to. The sentence landed with the weight of a door locking somewhere out of sight. Archer let it hang for a beat, then 2, then nodded once. Permission given to reality. Liam wrote referral, not a threat, a route. Talia kept her breathing even, her eyes steady. Malik's expression didn't change, but the set of his jaw said the room had finally entered the present tense. Rourke let 3 seconds pass, professional silence, not theater, then closed the loop. This ends now. The whisper that followed wasn't the catty speculation of a crowd starving for scandal. It was the quiet awe of people realizing they'd been attending a play and the set had just been struck mid-performance. Malik stood through it with the same tempered stillness he'd shown all day. No gloat, no flinch, only the clean line of vindication a man allows himself when the truth exits the classified file and walks into the light. Kincaid, who had never lacked for words, had none that wouldn't harm him. Archer folded the folio, tapped it once more, and placed it to her left. The fluorescents hummed, the benches breathed. For the first time, the courtroom felt like a place that could hold what it had been asked to hold. The doors opened, and 2 military police stepped in. Crisp uniforms, brass catching the lights, purpose preceding them like a shadow. One carried a folded document sealed with a red wafer. They crossed to Rourke without fanfare. The lead MP handed over the papers. The exchange looked less like ceremony than logistics. Rourke turned to Archer. Your Honor, he said, by order of the United States Department of Justice and under applicable federal statute, we are here to execute an arrest warrant. The room inhaled. Name, Archer asked, already knowing. Sergeant Blake Kincaid, Rourke said. Liam felt the pivot roll through the gallery, like a wave hitting pilings. Steady, undeniable. Talia didn't look at Kincaid. She kept her eyes on Archer, on the process doing what it occasionally promises to do. Malik's posture didn't change. His restraint had never depended on the room's opinion. Rourke paused just long enough for every head to swing. For assaulting a federally protected witness, he finished. The words cracked across the room like a clean report. Kincaid blinked. You've got to be kidding, he said, but the laugh he tried on didn't fit his face. The MPs didn't smile. Professionals at altitude rarely do. Liam scribbled, warrant, assault, federal. Miss Shu's fingers hovered, then darted, capturing each syllable as if speed could make history less heavy. Talia let her shoulders drop half an inch, exhaling tension that had warmed her spine all morning. Archer's gaze fixed on Kincaid with a stillness that suggested she had already started the paperwork in her mind. Torres shifted into position, neither eager nor reluctant, just aligned with the moment's requirements. Consequences had entered the room dressed in standards and shoes that didn't squeak. The senior MP addressed Kincaid, voice professional, impersonal. Sir, stand and place your hands behind your back. Kincaid's chin jutted. I'm not going anywhere, he snapped, volume doing the work confidence used to do. The sound rang wrong, self-betrayal disguised as command. Torres didn't move closer. He didn't need to. The MPs did not fill the silence with warnings. They let it count to 2, then 3. Sergeant, the MP repeated. Now! In the third row, a man coughed into his fist and missed, the sound ricocheting off wood. Liam's pulse ticked in his ears, not fear, but the body acknowledging gravity. Talia watched the choreography, the way surgeons watch a monitor, alert, detached, ready to note the exact second the line shifts. Malik's gaze stayed on the bench. The courtroom was a living thing, and right now it was deciding what it believed about itself. You don't walk into my courtroom, Kincaid began, but Archer cut him with a look as Rourke's voice arrived a fraction later, low and unyielding. It's not your courtroom, he said. It belongs to the people. And you violated the law you swore to uphold. The temperature dropped. Kincaid tried to step back, but space didn't cooperate. Limits had found him. The MPs moved like they'd practiced this 1,000 times, which they had. Precision without aggression, momentum without spectacle. Liam's pen scratched 2 words, civic spine, before he realized he'd written them. Miss Shu flagged the clerk's log, marking each action in a sequence that would be read later by people who weren't here. Talia didn't blink. Malik didn't move. Archer breathed in through her nose and out through a decision she'd already made. The room learned what it sounds like when authority realigns. The MPs closed on Kincaid. He jerked his arm, but the first officer caught the wrist, and the second fixed a hand at the shoulder with practiced economy. A metallic click punctured the hush, one cuff then the other, seated cleanly on skin that flushed scarlet, under fluorescent light. Gasps rippled, quick and contained, the sound of witnesses discovering they were part of a record. Talia's hand rose halfway to her mouth before she flattened it against her file. At the clerk's table, Aaron Cole, who had slipped back into the room, leaned in, eyes wide, absorbing the moment he'd quietly helped set in motion earlier with a message and a choice. Archer didn't flinch. She watched, not hungry, not satisfied, simply accountable. Liam lowered his camera and wrote, not spectacle, procedure, then underlined it. Twice. Archer's fingers whitened against the bench for a heartbeat, then released. She kept her tone even. The warrant will be recognized and executed. Deputy Torres, coordinate custody transfer. Kincaid fought the cuffs like a man bargaining with a past version of himself who used to be obeyed on volume alone. You can't do this, he blurted. I'll bury your careers. The threat sounded tired, like a cliche that hadn't noticed it was obsolete. Rourke didn't turn. He didn't need to. Liam felt the room shift again. Less outrage now, more relief. like the building had loosened a knot in its own frame. Talia drew a steadying breath, then another, her discipline returning to baseline. Malik moved at last, the chair legs releasing a soft scrape that was somehow the loudest sound in the room. He rose with the same measured control that had reframed the day. Malik faced Kincaid, not looming, not small, just exactly aligned. He didn't raise his voice. "You thought you were above the rules," he said, each word selected, not thrown. "Turns out the rules were above you all along." The sentence wasn't a victory lap, it was a calibration. The room went so still, the fluorescent hum felt like weather. Kincaid's eyes flickered, finding no purchase. Torres adjusted his stance by half an inch, a subtle reminder that the ground had been re-leveled. Liam didn't photograph it. He wrote it down because some statements don't need frames. Archer held the moment long enough to teach it something about itself, then nodded once, releasing the held breath of a building that had remembered why it exists. The MPs guided Kincaid toward the doors. Nothing rushed. Precision almost read as mercy, which is its own kind of consequence. Kincaid stiffened, then stalled, then froze long enough for everyone to see acceptance crash through his bluster and wash it away. The MPs redirected him with minimal force. His boots dragged a fraction, soles whispering against polished wood, as if the floor itself had chosen sides. The heavy doors opened on a practiced hinge. For a blink, the corridor yawned. Fluorescent light, long lines, the bureaucratic future. Then the doors closed, and the silence that fell wasn't empty. It held meaning. Liam shut his eyes for half a second, filing the sound of cuffs and the weight of quiet in the same drawer. Talia exhaled and set her notes flat, palms anchoring paper to oak. Archer looked down at her bench. The gavel sat within easy reach and completely unnecessary. Malik's shoulders eased a degree. The room did not cheer. It didn't need to. The point had been made. Archer stared at the gavel and let it remain exactly where it was. She spoke to the record without theatrics. "The warrant has been executed. The court acknowledges custody transfer and will forward all relevant materials to the appropriate authorities." She did not indulge the moment. She stewarded it. Behind Malik, Talia allowed herself the smallest curve at the mouth, the quiet triumph of witnessing a system nudge itself toward alignment. Liam didn't smile. He wrote, "Accountability, tangible." Miss Shu added a neatly bracketed line to the minutes, hands steady now that the path was visible. Rourke glanced at Malik, and then away. A commander's courtesy in a civilian room. The bench felt taller not because it had grown, but because the ground had stopped sinking beneath it. The courthouse rediscovered its center of gravity. Malik sat again, not slumping, not posturing, just settling into a chair that finally fit the facts. The storm had shifted poles, and everyone in the room knew it. Whatever this case had been at 8 in the morning, it wasn't that anymore. The heavy doors swung, and the hallway detonated into controlled chaos. Reporters, lenses, bodies vectoring for quotes. The energy outside was no longer predatory. It felt like awe trying to take notes. Inside, Archer's courtroom held its shape, the way a harbor holds steady water while weather rages beyond the breakwall. Talia squeezed Malik's shoulder, one beat then gone. Liam rose with the others, already editing the first paragraph in his head, deleting the old angle, resisting the easy melodrama in favor of what actually happened. The narrative people had brought into the room had shed its skin. What remained was harder, cleaner, truer. On the steps, microphones blossomed like steel flowers, but the questions that came weren't the sneers of an hour ago. "Mr. Grant, can you speak about your service? How does today change your view of justice here? What should the public understand?" Camera flashes strobed, but the energy felt human, not hungry. Malik didn't rush. He moved with the same measured stride that had carried him through the courtroom. Admiral Rourke held half a pace behind, radiating a quiet authority that needed no introduction. Talia stayed close without crowding, a sentry with file folders. Liam didn't jab his mic forward. He listened. The air smelled like rain on hot concrete, even though the sky stayed clear. It felt like a promise you don't speak out loud. Malik reached the midpoint of the steps and let the crowd settle. He chose a place to stand. He didn't seek the light. It found him. He didn't shield his eyes, didn't duck his head, just held a steady line and a small, unshowy smile. It wasn't the grin of a winner. It was resolve worn like a well-fitted coat. "What do you want people to remember about today?" a young reporter asked, Mike trembling from nerves, not cynicism. Malik scanned the faces, curious, cautious, some repentant, and answered like he was speaking to one person. "Doing the right thing isn't about what's easy," he said, voice low but caring. "It's about what's necessary." He didn't wait to embroider it. He let the sentence stand, exactly the length it needed to be. Rourke's glance was approval without decoration. The MPs formed a corridor no one resented. The black SUV eased to the curb, door already open. Malik nodded to Talia, to Liam, to the crowd as a whole, then stepped down into the next part of the day. The question hung in the air behind him, answered and still echoing. The MPs didn't shove, they guided, making space with presence, not force. Malik reached the SUV and paused long enough to make eye contact with a woman at the edge of the scrum who wasn't holding a camera. She dipped her head, a quiet thanks. He dipped his in return, then he climbed in, the motion unhurried, unafraid. Rourke followed, pulled the door closed with a solid, final thunk that sounded like a chapter ending properly. The crowd thinned by degrees, rather than dispersing all at once, people absorbing what they'd seen, the way light soaks into skin after a long winter. Liam stood at the base of the steps, not chasing the bumper, not shouting one more question. He let the departure be the exclamation point it already was, and saved his words for the page. Off to the side, Liam Carter kept his laptop bag slung over a shoulder that ached from hours of stillness. He hadn't fought toward the curb, he hadn't needed to. He looked down at his screen. A draft headline stared back at him in a font now too small for what it tried to hold. Local man cited for disturbing the peace. He didn't add another word. He closed the laptop gently, almost like you'd close a book in a church. This isn't just a news hit, he thought. It's a reminder, the kind that reaches past a single day and rattles the drawer where people keep their assumptions. He watched the SUV's taillights merge into ordinary traffic, a small shape in a city full of other lives. Then he straightened, found his pen again, and began writing something worthy of the wait he'd just witnessed. The SUV slipped into the afternoon's flow. Inside, Rourke watched the road the way a mountain watches weather, attentive, unmoved. Malik turned to the window and let the city slide by in a soft smear of asphalt and sunlight. Glass gave him back his own face, older than the one buried in the file Archer hadn't let leave her bench. More weathered, maybe, but intact. He didn't look heroic. He looked like someone who had carried heavy things a long way and hadn't set them down wrong. Outside, strangers crossed streets with coffee and earbuds and burdens of their own, unaware a hinge had turned a few blocks away. The hum of the engine settled into a patient baseline. Malik tracked a pair of kids laughing at a bus stop, then closed his eyes a second and opened them again. The world went on. Thank God for that. Maybe that's exactly how it should be, he thought. Quiet victories don't need parades, they need continuity. He wasn't hungry for applause, or headlines, or a statue that would collect pigeons. He wanted process to mean something, not only for him, but for anyone who might sit where he'd sat today without the shield of a sealed file or a commander's voice. The SUV turned a corner. The courthouse dropped out of sight like a tide going slack. Malik let a breath leak out. He hadn't acknowledged hoarding. Relief is loud when you've trained your life to run silent. Across from him, Rourke didn't speak. He didn't need to. Presence was sufficient. In the reflection, Malik watched his own eyes, steady as a level line. He took the measure of the day and found it harsh and somehow right. He watched the city keep its promises to itself. Justice, he thought, doesn't live only in statutes or on a walnut bench. It travels in people willing to stand in the space between what's right and what's easy, then refuse to move when pushed. It shows up when a public defender says objection until the word means something, when a clerk sends a message because something rings wrong, when a judge stops mistaking volume for authority and lets fact speak, when a commander walks into a civilian room and submits power to process, not over it. Sometimes justice arrives late and still on time. The way rain hits a dry field and everything lifts its face, Malik leaned back and let the engine hum carry the thought. If he'd learned anything, in places no map names, it's that timing feels arbitrary to the impatient and precise to the prepared. He remembered deployments where the world's noise tried to drown the compass, and the fix was to cut the volume, watch and wait. Today had demanded the same discipline. Hold your line, let the lies exhaust themselves, then step forward when the truth finally has legs. He thought of Talia's steady hands, of Liam's restraint, of Ms. Haishu's patience under pressure, of Torres standing exactly where duty told him to stand. He thought of Aaron Cole, whose quiet choice in a hallway had set a chain in motion that no one noticed until it was everywhere. He thought very briefly of Kincaid, not with vengeance, but with the sober knowledge that consequences don't delight the mature. They instruct. The SUV's signal clicked twice before the driver changed lanes. Malik watched the mirror. He did not look back to see if the courthouse could still see him. Sometimes a story isn't just what happened, it's what remains afterward. How people carry themselves differently, a notch more aware, a shade more careful about the easy categories they used to trust. The day had thrown a hard light across lazy narratives and showed their seams. That mattered. Malik didn't romanticize it. No one day fixes a system, but some days mark the start of better habits. In the glass, his reflection felt less like a stranger and more like the man he'd promised himself he'd remain when the work ended and the ordinary hours began. Work finally spoke, a quiet sentence that filled the space like ballast. "You held the line." Malik nodded. "We all did," he said. The SUV drifted past a row of school kids, triangulating a soccer ball across chalked asphalt. They shouted, missed, laughed, tried again. Malik smiled, small and unshowy, at the sight. Justice isn't a relic preserved in mahogany. It's kinetic, carried, passed, practiced. It lives in the way a city official resists the temptation to look away, in the way a rookie reporter edits a headline instead of chasing a hot take, in the way a judge widens the aperture when new facts arrive. It's not accidental. It's chosen, sustained, defended by people who've decided their comfort is less important than their integrity. Malik let the thought settle like a stone in a riverbed, something to stand on the next time the water rose. The SUV's interior smelled faintly of leather and dust and institutional cleaner, the unromantic odor of gears turning. He closed his eyes again and counted 4 in, 4 out, box breathing for a day that had asked him to be both still and visible. When he opened them, the horizon line hadn't moved. That was the point. Today reminded him, and anyone paying attention, that justice doesn't restrict itself to a docket or a badge. It shows up as courage when it would be simpler to fold, as truth spoken without heat when heat would feel good, as restraint in the face of provocation, which is a higher order of strength than any punch thrown. He could have stood earlier, revealed credentials, demanded deference. He had chosen silence until it carried more force than an argument, because Aaron Cole had recognized a pattern and made a call, because Miss Sue had phrased a sentence like a doorway, because Admiral Rourke understood that loyalty looks like showing up, not being loud, because Talia had insisted documentation matters more than volume, because Liam had listened first. Sometimes the person the room underestimates turns out to be the fulcrum. You learn that once. You don't forget it. If this moved you, if something in your throat tightened, if you felt a small shift in how you sort strangers, carry it forward, share it, not as spectacle, but as a reminder that the story we tell about justice becomes the story we live. Hit the button if that's your thing. Better yet, call a friend who thinks nothing changes and tell them why today mattered. Your attention matters. Your voice steadies the line. Stories don't fix systems by themselves, but they recruit allies and stiffen spines. They nudge us to show up at a council meeting or ask a better question or hold a leader to the standard they recite on good days. If you walked into this thinking narrative is cheap, you might walk out admitting its currency. Spend it well. Save some for tomorrow. The work doesn't end because one room remembered itself. Around here, we believe every person carries a story with the power to tilt a day, a block, a policy, sometimes a life. We try to tell those stories clean, not because we're saints, but because truth is a better architect than outrage. That's our mark. That's why we keep showing up with notebooks and cameras and the humility to be wrong and revise, with you watching, arguing in good faith, sharing because the tale is worthy, not because it spikes the numbers. We get to keep doing it. And if a story like Malik Grant's reorients a handful of compasses, that's not a trend. That's a legacy seated in ordinary ground. Thanks for staying with us long enough to hear the whole thing. Keep your eyes open. Keep your questions sharp. Keep your courage near at hand. Some days that's all the difference, because justice isn't a fireworks show. It's a promise we renew, not words carved in stone, but choices made in rooms like Archer's and streets like ours, made by clerks and deputies, by judges and journalists, by commanders who understand power is a trust, and by neighbors who refuse to look away. If this story did anything for you, let it do one more thing. Remind you that power can be asked to behave and sometimes will. Remind you the quiet person in the back row might be the hinge the day swings on. Remind you that courage isn't loud, it's steady. We'll keep telling the truth as best we can with your help. That's the work. That's the point. And with you beside us, listening, questioning, insisting, we'll keep that promise. Lesson 1. Restraint is strength, not surrender. If you've lived long enough to remember rotary phones and black and white news, you also know this: the loudest person in the room isn't always the strongest. Malik Grant sat in that defendant's chair the way many of us have sat in hard moments, back straight, jaw set, saying less than we felt. Some will mistake that for passivity, but those of you who wore a uniform, raised a family on too little sleep, or kept the peace in a noisy workplace understand the older truth: restraint is discipline. In that courtroom, a uniformed officer tried to bait him, first with words, then with a hidden kick under the table. Malik didn't bite. He went to the same place many of you have gone when the unfair thing lands. Slow breath, steady hands, eyes down until the room stops shaking. That wasn't weakness. That was a man who knows what he can do and chooses not to. When the phone rang at the clerk's desk and the Department of Defense asked for the judge by name, the story began to turn. Not because Malik raised his voice, but because he refused to let someone else's anger write his character. For older readers, this lesson comes home easily. You don't have to meet every shove with a shove. Sometimes the most powerful sentence a person can speak is the one they don't, backed by a life that proves who they are. Lesson 2. Systems move. When ordinary people do their jobs well, grand gestures make headlines, steady duty makes history. Watch who actually shifted the ground. A clerk answered the phone, listened, and relayed the message without drama. A deputy kept order with calm hands. A public defender objected again and again until overruled stopped being the last word. A rookie reporter put his pen down long enough to watch, really watch, and let the facts rewrite his first draft. An IT team pulled audit logs no one expected to be checked and found a body camera shut off at the worst moment. And yes, an admiral walked in, but he didn't bulldoze the court. He submitted paperwork, offered a protective order, and let the process do what the process is supposed to do. If you came of age when neighbors carried casseroles down the block after a fire, you know this rhythm. Communities are not rescued by heroes dropping from the sky. They are steadied by people who do the next right thing at their station, whether that station is a bench, a desk, a doorway, or a witness stand. That's what happened here. The rumor that Malik was a problem met a chain of ordinary competence, link by link, until the chain held. For those of us with grandchildren, church groups, veteran posts, or bowling leagues, the takeaway is simple and sturdy. Keep your post. Answer the phone carefully. Tell the truth cleanly. Let your paperwork be tight enough that fairness doesn't depend on volume. When many hands do small duties well, even an old room remembers how to be just. Lesson 3. Accountability works best when it's boring and visible. Most of us don't love paperwork, but we trust it when it's honest. What changed the day wasn't a speech. It was exhibits stamped, logs time-stamped, warrants executed, and custody transferred without a scene. The judge read a sealed memo, accepted it under the rules, and narrowed the case to facts. The defense presented surveillance stills with time codes. The clerk entered an email as an exhibit. The deputy removed a badge and a sidearm the quiet way professionals do. Military police served a federal warrant with no chest thumping, just clear words and clean steps. For older Americans who've kept check registers and saved receipts in manila folders, there's comfort here. Order isn't glamorous, but it is protective. We don't need fireworks when a wrong is corrected. We need a record. That's what turned bravado into handcuffs, not revenge, not a viral moment. Procedure, and that matters for more than one afternoon. It teaches younger eyes, children on courthouse steps, students on civics field trips, new hires in their first week, that fairness is not a feeling, it's a set of habits. When a system shows its work in daylight, who signed, who logged, what rule applied, trust can grow back a little, even after a bad hour. The lesson isn't that every day ends like this one. Many don't. It's that our best shot at a decent ending is the steady, visible practice of rules that bind the powerful as surely as they bind the rest of us. Conclusion: what to carry forward? If you're 65 or 85, you have seen America at its best and its worst. You know that stories can drift toward drama and away from truth unless someone keeps tugging them back. Malik's day in court reminds us of 3 practical things we can each hold on to. First, dignity is not passive. You can be calm without being small. Second, community isn't a slogan. It's a clerk, a deputy, an attorney, a reporter, people who choose duty over comfort in the moment they're needed. Third, accountability is less a thunderclap than a ledger. Entries made in order in ink, so no one can pretend later that nothing happened. None of this asks more of us than we have to give. It asks for steadiness, not spectacle. For those who raised kids, built businesses, nursed spouses, or coached teams on chilly Saturday mornings, that steadiness is already in your bones. Share the habit. Tell the younger folks in your life what restraint looks like, what a clean process sounds like, and why "show me the record" is a good sentence to keep handy. We may never walk into a courtroom behind an admiral, but we will all sit in rooms where rumor tries to outrun the facts. On those days, breathe 4 in and 4 out. Keep your post and let the record speak. That's not naive. That's how trust is rebuilt, one careful entry at a time. Friends, after hearing Malik's story and these 3 lessons, I'd love to learn from you. In your own life, when did restraint change the outcome for the better, even when speaking louder would have felt good in the moment? What habits, notes kept, dates written down, calm questions asked have helped you keep things fair in tough situations? Share a memory in the comments so others can borrow your wisdom. If this resonated, please like the video, subscribe to my channel, and pass it along to someone who could use a steadier compass. Your voice keeps this community grounded.